In the endless Arctic night, a freezing little girl wanders across the ice, lost and near collapse. From the darkness emerges a lonely Eskimo hunter who hasn't spoken to another soul in years. Kneeling beside her, he says softly, "I need someone to talk to, and you need shelter." What begins as a simple act of mercy becomes a story of survival, healing, and the forging of an unexpected family in one of the harshest places on Earth. The hunter has been alone for so long that his voice cracks when he speaks. The girl cannot remember her name or how she came to be wandering the frozen wasteland. Together they must face brutal storms, dangerous wildlife, and the challenge of learning to trust again. But what neither of them knows is that their meeting was not by chance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind bit through the darkness like invisible teeth as Aput guided the small figure through knee-deep snow. His weathered seal oil lamp cast dancing shadows across the white expanse, the flame protected by carved bone that his grandfather had shaped decades ago. Each step forward required careful consideration. The ice beneath could be solid or treacherous, and carrying an unconscious child changed everything about his usual confident stride across this frozen world. The girl moved like someone walking. Through a dream, her small legs struggling to match his pace. Ice crystals had formed in her dark hair, and her lips held the blue tinge that spoke of death approaching with patient certainty. Aput had seen that color before, in the faces of hunters who stayed too long on the ice, in the children who wandered too far from their mother's warmth. His shelter appeared gradually from the swirling snow, a depression carved into a natural windbreak where ice and stone created protection from the endless Arctic wind. He had built it 3 years ago, when solitude became his chosen companion. When the sound of other voices grew too painful to bear, the entrance was low, forcing them to crawl through a tunnel that trapped precious warmth inside. "Come," he whispered, the first word he had spoken aloud in months. His voice emerged rusty and uncertain, like a tool left too long without use. "Safe here." The interior of the shelter measured perhaps 8 feet across, carved from packed snow and lined with seal skins that had taken him 2 seasons to cure properly. The seal oil lamp found its permanent place on a shelf of ice, its steady flame transforming the space from a cave into something approaching home. Warmth radiated from the burning oil, and the girl gravitated toward it instinctively, her small hands reaching for heat that might save her life. Aput removed his outer parka and wrapped it around her shoulders, the fox fur still holding his body warmth. Beneath her own torn coat, he could see she wore clothes meant for a different climate, synthetic materials designed for convenience rather than survival. Someone had dressed her for a journey to a place where central heating and hot coffee waited, not for wandering across ice that could kill within hours. Her breathing came shallow and fast, the rhythm of a body fighting to maintain core temperature. Aput had learned these signs during his 47 years in this unforgiving land. He moved with practiced efficiency, lighting a second lamp to raise the temperature, preparing hot tea from melted snow and precious leaves he saved for emergencies. "Drink," he said, supporting her head as she sipped the bitter liquid. Small, slow. The girl's eyes opened fully for the first time, revealing brown irises that seemed too large for her thin face. She studied him with the intense focus of someone trying to understand a world that had suddenly become foreign and dangerous. When she attempted to speak, only soft sounds emerged, syllables that might have been words in any language or no language at all. Aput cut small pieces from dried seal meat, the protein and fat that would help her body rebuild its defenses against the cold. She ate mechanically, without pleasure, but with the desperation of genuine hunger, Between bites, she touched things around the shelter, the smooth ice walls, the soft fur of his sleeping area, the carved bone handle of his hunting knife, as if confirming their reality through her fingertips. Outside, the wind increased its assault on their refuge, but the shelter held firm. Aput had built it according to knowledge passed down through generations, understanding how snow could become stronger than wood when shaped with wisdom and patience. The girl listened to the storm's voice with wide eyes, perhaps recognizing the sound that had pursued her across the ice. "Sleep now," Aput said, arranging furs to create a warm nest beside the lamp. "Morning will come." She curled into the makeshift bed like a small animal seeking safety, her breathing gradually slowing as warmth penetrated her core. Aput sat nearby, keeping watch as he had learned to do during long hunting expeditions. But this vigil felt different, charged with responsibility for a life other than his own. The seal oil lamp flickered occasionally, casting shifting patterns on the walls that reminded him of other times, other faces warmed by its steady glow. For 3 years, this flame had been his only companion through the long Arctic night. Now it illuminated something he had forgotten existed, the simple miracle of shared shelter, shared warmth, shared survival against a world that offered neither mercy nor comfort to the unprepared. Dawn arrived, not with sunlight, but with a subtle shift in the quality of darkness, a lessening of the night's absolute grip on the world. Aput woke to find the girl sitting upright, her small fingers tracing patterns in the frost that had formed on the shelter's walls during the night. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone testing whether her body would obey her commands. In the lamp's steady glow, he could see her face clearly for the first time. She appeared to be 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair that fell in tangled waves around thin shoulders. Her skin bore the pallor of prolonged cold exposure, but color had returned to her lips during the night. Most striking were her eyes, alert and intelligent, but carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for such a young face. "Better," Aput said, his voice still rough from disuse. He gestured toward the teapot warming beside the lamp. "More drink." The girl nodded, but when she tried to speak, the words emerged as a confused mixture of sounds. "Cold, may get cold, so cold, aye." She pressed her hands against her temples, frustration evident in every line of her small body. Aput recognized fragments, English words, mixed with what might have been Danish or Norwegian, punctuated by sounds that could have been Inuktitut or another Arctic language. Someone had taught her pieces of many tongues, but trauma or cold had scrambled her ability to choose which one to use. "Slow," he said, pouring warm tea into a carved cup. "Words will come." She accepted the cup with both hands, savoring the warmth against her palms before drinking. When she lowered it, she pointed to herself and tried again. "Maya, no, that not right. Siku, nay, ika siku." Her voice trailed off in defeat. Aput considered this carefully. In his language, siku meant sea ice, a strange name for a child, but not impossible. He touched his chest with one weathered finger. "Aput," he said clearly. "Snow." Recognition flickered in her eyes. She repeated the word, her pronunciation careful but accurate. Then she pointed to herself and shook her head, indicating she remained lost in the maze of her own identity. From her coat pocket, she withdrew a torn page from what had once been a children's book. The paper was damp and creased, but the illustration remained clear. A family of polar bears walking across ice beneath a star-filled sky. She held it toward the lamp's light, studying the image with intense concentration. "Bears," she said in English, then tried other words. "Isbjörn, Nanook." Each word seemed to unlock another fragment of memory, but none provided the key to her complete past. Aput examined the page more closely. The printing looked recent, and the illustration style suggested it came from a modern book, not an old traditional story. This child had been part of a world very different from his own, a place where books were common, and children learned about polar bears from pictures rather than hunting them for survival. "Story," he said, pointing to the page. "Good story." She nodded eagerly, then began to recite fragments of text in a voice that grew stronger with each word. The bear family walked across the ice, looking for their home. The little bear was scared, but Mama Bear said. She stopped abruptly, pressing the page against her chest. Ebert understood. The story had triggered something deeper, perhaps a memory of someone reading to her, of safety and warmth that existed before she found herself alone on the ice. He moved slowly, demonstrating his lack of threat, and began to tend the lamp that had sustained them through the night. The flame required careful attention. Too much oil and it would smoke, too little and it would die. He showed her how to adjust the wick, how to read the flame's color for signs of health or distress. She watched with the focused attention of someone who understood that such knowledge might mean the difference between life and death. "Lamp," he said, using the English word she seemed to understand best. "Very important. Keep warm. Cook food. See in dark." She repeated the word, then surprised him by adding kulik. The Inuktitut term for the traditional lamp emerged from her lips, as if her body remembered. Reread what her conscious mind had forgotten. Iput stared at her in wonder. This child carried knowledge of his people's ways, knowledge that suggested connections he did not yet understand. The mystery of her presence deepened with each word she spoke, each gesture that revealed familiarity with traditions that few outsiders ever learned. Outside their shelter, the wind began to rise again, promising another day of confinement in their small refuge. But inside, something had shifted. Two people, who had been strangers in the darkness, were beginning to find ways to communicate across the barriers of language. Memory and circumstance. The blizzard arrived with the fury of something ancient and angry, turning the world beyond their shelter into a white void that erased all landmarks, all sense of direction, all hope of movement. For 3 days, the wind screamed across the ice with such violence that even Aput, who had weathered countless storms, felt humbled by its power. On the second night, fever took hold of the girl. She thrashed in her sleep, muttering words in languages that shifted like the wind itself. Aput pressed damp cloth to her forehead, the water warmed by holding containers near the lamp's flame. Her small body burned with heat that seemed to contradict everything about their frozen world. "Mama," she cried out in her delirium, the word clear in any language. "Avo ertu, Mama. Where are you?" Then came other fragments, glimpses into a life that existed before the ice claimed her. She spoke of lights that moved across dark water, of voices calling through static, of engines that went silent when they shouldn't have. Her fevered mind replayed scenes that Aput could only partially understand. But the terror in her voice transcended language barriers. During her quieter moments, when the fever ebbed enough for consciousness to return, Aput shared pieces of his own story. The words came slowly at first, unused to having an audience, but gradually gaining strength as he realized she listened even when she seemed too sick to comprehend. "Had family once," he said, his hands busy with tasks that kept him grounded while emotions threatened to surface. "Wife named Siku, like ice. Strong woman, brave woman. Could hunt seals better than most men." The girl's eyes tracked his movements as he prepared broth from precious dried meat, her fever-bright gaze following each gesture with intense focus. "Son too, Nuka, smart boy, quick learner. Could read ice-like book, know where safe to walk, where danger waits underneath." Aput's voice grew softer, the words carrying weights he had carried alone for 3 years. Taught him to carve, to hunt, to listen to wind's voice. He paused in his work, staring at the lamp's flame as if it might reveal truths hidden in its steady glow. "Sickness came with trading ship. White man's disease that our body's not ready for. Fever like yours but stronger. Took them both in same week." The girl reached out with one small hand, her fingers barely touching his wrist. The gesture was simple but profound, the first comfort she had offered rather than received. "Why you alone?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from fever and crying. "Why not go to people?" Aput considered the question carefully. Why had he chosen isolation over the support of his community? Why had he built this shelter at the edge of the world, rather than staying where other voices might ease the silence his family's absence had created? "Guilt," he said finally, the word heavy with 3 years of accumulated weight. "Should have protected them better. Should have kept sickness away from our home. Should have been stronger, smarter, more careful. Not your fault," the girl said with startling clarity. "Sickness just comes sometimes. Like storms. Nobody can stop storms." Her wisdom surprised him, this insight that cut through his elaborate justifications and touched the simple truth he had been avoiding. Children, he remembered, often saw clearly what adults obscured with complicated reasoning. During her fevered dreams, she spoke of people who might have been her parents, voices that guided and protected, hands that provided comfort in moments of fear. But she also revealed darker memories, fragments of confusion and separation that suggested trauma beyond simply being lost. Around her neck, hidden beneath layers of clothing, Aput discovered a small wooden cross carved with letters that meant nothing to him. MC. When he showed it to her during a lucid moment, she clutched it protectively but couldn't explain its significance. "Important," she said, pressing the cross against her chest. "Someone gave me, someone who loved me." The storm continued its assault on their refuge, but inside their small space, something fundamental had shifted. Two people who had lost everything, he through death, she through circumstances she couldn't yet fully remember, had begun to recognize in each other a possibility of healing. As the girl's fever finally broke on the 3rd day, she opened her eyes with new clarity and spoke a complete sentence in perfect English. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." Aput felt something crack open in his chest. Some barrier he had built around his heart during 3 years of self-imposed exile. Perhaps, he thought, some kinds of isolation were more dangerous than any Arctic storm. When the storm finally exhausted itself, Aput emerged from the shelter into a world transformed. Fresh snow had reshaped every familiar landmark, creating new hills where none had existed and filling valleys that had guided his steps for years. The silence felt profound after days of howling wind, so complete that his own breathing seemed loud enough to disturb the peace. The girl insisted on accompanying him to check his traplines. Despite his concerns about her strength after the fever, she moved behind him with surprising grace, stepping carefully in his footprints to conserve energy in the deep snow. Her recovery had been remarkable, but Aput noticed she favored her left side slightly, as if some injury from before their meeting still caused discomfort. "How you know where to go?" she asked, as they walked across what appeared to be an endless white desert. "Everything looks same to me." Aput paused, studying the landscape with eyes trained by decades of reading subtle signs. He pointed to a ridge barely visible in the distance, then to the way snow had drifted around a particular formation of ice. "Wind always comes from same direction here. Snow tells story of where wind has been, how strong, how long." He knelt and scooped up a handful of crystals, letting them sift through his fingers. "The snow fell yesterday. Underneath is older snow, more hard. Like pages in book, you can read what happened before." The girl watched with fascination as he demonstrated how to test the ice beneath snow with a walking stick, how to recognize the sound that meant solid footing versus dangerous gaps where a person could fall through into the water below. "My father teach me these things when I was smaller than you," Aput continued. "His father teach him, and grandfather's father before that. Knowledge passed down like precious gift." They reached his first trap, a carefully constructed snare designed to catch Arctic foxes whose pelts provided both warmth and trading value. But the trap was empty, undisturbed since before the storm. Aput frowned, examining the area for signs of animal activity. "Strange," he murmured. "Usually foxes come here to hunt seal holes." Snow is right, wind is right, but no tracks. The second and third traps told the same story, not just empty, but avoided entirely. No animal tracks crossed the areas where Aput typically found abundant signs of wildlife. Even the seal breathing holes, which should have shown fresh evidence of use, appeared abandoned. Animals know something we not know. The girl asked, her voice carrying the intuitive understanding that sometimes came from children who had learned to read danger in adult faces. As they walked toward his final trap location, Aput found his thoughts drifting to memories he usually kept carefully locked away. Working the trap lines had been something he shared with Nuka, teaching his son the patience required for successful hunting, the respect owed to animals that provided sustenance and survival. From his pack, he withdrew a small ivory figurine, a polar bear carved with intricate detail that showed individual claws, the texture of fur, the intelligent expression in the bear's eyes. Nuka had made it during his last winter, spending evening after evening perfecting each tiny feature by lamplight. "Your son made this?" the girl asked when he showed her the carving. "Last gift he gave me before sickness came. Said polar bear was strongest animal, most smart, most brave. Wanted me to have strength of bear when he could not be with me anymore." The girl examined the figurine with gentle reverence, understanding instinctively that she held something precious beyond its material value. He was good artist. Bear looks real, like it might walk away if we're not watching. Nuka had gift for seeing life in stone, in bone, in wood. Could make ordinary things beautiful. Aput's voice carried pride, mixed with grief, that still felt fresh despite 3 years of healing. Wanted to teach him more things, but time ran out too fast. They found the final trap not just empty, but disturbed in a way that suggested large animals had been in the area. But instead of the tracks Aput expected to see, they discovered something that made no sense in this remote location. Fragments of metal, twisted and partially buried in old snow. The girl bent to examine the debris, her small face growing troubled as recognition flickered in her eyes. "This looks like," she began, then stopped, pressing one hand against her forehead as if trying to catch a memory that wanted to slip away. Aput gathered several pieces of the metal, noting their unusual properties. Too light to be iron, too uniform to be natural formation. Whatever had left these fragments behind was not part of the Arctic world he had known for 47 years. The mystery deepened as they discovered more debris scattered across a wide area, suggesting something large had passed through recently, disturbing the natural order enough to drive away animals that had used these hunting grounds for generations. The metal fragments led them across the ice, like breadcrumbs in a children's tale, each piece larger and more recognizable than the last. Aput had seen enough crashed snowmobiles and damaged hunting equipment to recognize manufactured materials, but these pieces possessed qualities that didn't match anything in his experience. Too smooth, too precisely formed, too alien to belong in his familiar world. The girl grew increasingly agitated as they followed the debris trail, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. She kept touching the wooden cross at her throat, her fingers working over the carved letters as if they might reveal secrets she desperately needed to remember. "Should go back," she said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Don't want to see." But Aput had noticed smoke on the horizon, not the black smoke of burning oil or wood, but the pale grey that might indicate a small fire maintained for warmth rather than destruction. Someone else was alive out here, possibly someone who needed help. His years of isolation hadn't erased the fundamental obligation to aid fellow travelers in this harsh land. "Someone there might need help," he said gently. "Maybe hurt, maybe lost like you were." The crashed aircraft appeared gradually through the blowing snow, its broken wings jutting from a drift, like the bones of some massive creature. The fuselage had split during impact, but not catastrophically. This had been a controlled crash, the work of a skilled pilot fighting to save lives rather than simply falling from the sky. The girl stopped breathing when she saw it. For long moments she stood frozen, staring at the wreckage with an expression of recognition mixed with terror. Then memory flooded back with such force that she staggered, nearly falling before Appet caught her shoulders. "I remember," she whispered, tears beginning to freeze on her cheeks. "The plane, the storm, Mama screaming for me to hold on, Papa trying to keep us together when everything went wrong." Aput guided her to a piece of debris where she could sit, giving her time to process memories that had been locked away by trauma and cold. The aircraft bore markings he couldn't read, but their style suggested civilian rather than military origin. No bodies were visible in the wreckage, which could mean the occupants had survived the initial crash. Inside the broken fuselage, they found evidence of recent habitation. Empty food containers, makeshift bedding, signs that people had lived here for some time after the crash. But everything appeared abandoned, as if the survivors had left in haste or been forced to evacuate by circumstances beyond their control. Among the scattered belongings, Aput discovered a piece of twisted aluminum bearing unusual markings, symbols that looked almost like writing, but in no alphabet he recognized. The metal itself felt strange, lighter than it should be, and somehow warmer than the surrounding cold. When the girl saw it, she reached for it instinctively, then pulled her hand back as if it had burned her. "That was Mama's," she said, her voice small and frightened. "Part of her equipment. She said it was important, that it would help people understand things about the ice." "What kind of equipment?" "For measuring, for listening to sounds under the ice that people can't hear. Mama and Papa were scientists, studying how the ice changes, how it talks to the water underneath." The words came faster now, as if speaking them aloud helped organize the chaos in her memory. "They said the ice was sick, that it was breaking apart too fast, and they needed to find out why." Aput examined the metal fragment more carefully, noting how its surface seemed to shimmer slightly in the lamplight. Whatever technology had created this was far beyond anything he understood, but he trusted the girl's identification of it as scientific equipment. "Your parents, they survived the crash?" "I think so. I remember Mama wrapping me in coats, Papa checking to make sure I wasn't hurt. Then they told me to walk toward the traditional hunting grounds, said the old people would know how to keep me safe." She touched her cross again. "Mama gave me this, said it would protect me until they could come find me." The implications settled heavily between them. Her parents had deliberately sent her away from the crash site, trusting that traditional knowledge and ancient survival skills would preserve their daughter where modern technology had failed. They had chosen to trust people like Aput rather than attempting rescue through conventional channels. "How long ago?" Aput asked. "I don't know. Days, maybe weeks. Everything blurs together after I started walking. The discovery changed everything." The girl wasn't simply lost. She was a messenger, carrying knowledge about changes in the ice that might affect everyone who lived in this harsh land. Her parents' research could be the key to understanding why animals were avoiding their traditional grounds, why weather patterns seemed more violent than usual. Back at their shelter, Aput worked with surprising ingenuity to repair the radio they had salvaged from the wreckage. His hands, accustomed to carving bone and working with traditional materials, adapted quickly to the foreign technology. The girl watched with fascination as he used seal sinew and carved ivory to create improvised connections. Where modern components had failed, Papa always said traditional knowledge and new technology should work together, she said, handing him small pieces as he requested them. Like ice and water. Same thing, just different forms. The radio crackled to life suddenly, filling their shelter with static that gradually resolved into distant voices, speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Both listeners froze, hardly daring to breathe as words emerged from the electronic whisper. Search Zone 7 remains clear. No visual contact, no emergency beacon response. Copy that, Northern Light. Expanding search pattern to include traditional hunting grounds. Weather window closing in 6 hours. Be advised, fuel reserves at 60%. Cannot maintain extended search beyond scheduled return. The girl's face went pale as she recognized the cadence and terminology of professional search operations. These were people looking for survivors, people who might be searching for her family. But the conversations carried an undertone of diminishing hope that chilled Aput more than Arctic wind. He adjusted the radio carefully, trying to clear the signal without losing the fragile connection to the outside world. The partially functional device represented their only link to rescue, but also a complex moral choice he hadn't anticipated when he first decided to help a lost child. "Maya. My name is Maya," the girl said suddenly, as if hearing the search teams had unlocked the final piece of her identity. "Maya Chen. My parents are Dr. Elena Chen and Dr. Marcus Chen. They study ice cores and climate patterns." "North Star Base, this is Rescue 7. A new voice emerged from the static. "We have reports of possible survivor activity in grid reference 7 Alpha, requesting permission to investigate." "Negative, Rescue 7. That area is beyond safe operational distance. Weather deteriorating rapidly. Return to base immediately." Maya's small hand gripped Aput's wrist with surprising strength. "They're leaving. They think we're too far away to help." Aput stared at the radio, understanding the weight of the decision before him. He could respond now, guide the search teams to their location, potentially reunite Maya with her family and return to his chosen solitude. Or he could remain silent, keeping this unexpected companionship that had begun to heal wounds he thought would never close. "What you want to do?" he asked, though part of him already knew her answer. "I want to find Mama and Papa, but I don't want you to be alone again." Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "Is there a way to do both?" Before Aput could answer, another transmission caught their attention. "Base, this is Dr. Elena Chen. Emergency frequency Alpha 77. If anyone receives this transmission, please respond. We have established temporary shelter at coordinates." The signal dissolved into static, but Maya had heard her mother's voice. "Mama!" she cried toward the radio. "Mama, I'm here!" Aput quickly adjusted the transmission settings, his heart racing as he realized Maya's parents were alive and apparently close enough for radio contact. But the battery indicator on the salvaged radio showed dangerously low power levels. They would have one chance, perhaps two, to make contact before the device died completely. "Maya to Mama," he helped her speak into the radio's microphone. "Maya to Mama, are you receiving?" Static filled the shelter for long moments before Elena Chen's voice emerged, thick with emotion and disbelief. "Maya? Oh God, Maya, is that really you? Where are you, sweetheart? Are you safe?" "I'm with Aput. He saved me, Mama. He took care of me when I was sick and cold and scared. Thank God." "Maya, listen carefully. We're at the old weather station, about 15 kilometers northeast of where we crashed. Can you reach us? Are you able to travel?" Aput knew the weather station, an abandoned research facility that had been built decades ago and left to the elements when funding disappeared. It would provide better shelter than anything he could construct. But the journey across unstable ice would be dangerous, especially with weather conditions deteriorating. The radio battery began to fade, their connection growing weaker with each word. "Maya, stay where you are safe. We'll come to you. Is your rescuer there? Can he hear me?" Aput took the microphone with hands that trembled slightly. Speaking to strangers felt strange after years of silence, but necessity overcame reluctance. "This is Aput. Your daughter is safe. But radio dying soon. Weather very bad for travel. Aput, thank you for saving our daughter. We'll find a way to reach you. Don't attempt travel in this storm. Keep her safe until we can—" The radio died with a final whisper of static, leaving them in silence that felt heavier than before. The silence that followed the radio's death felt different from the comfortable quiet they had shared before. Now it carried the weight of decisions that would reshape both their lives, of connections re-established and futures uncertain. Maya sat holding the dead radio as if her grip alone might restore its voice, her small face reflecting the complex emotions of someone pulled between two worlds. From her coat pocket, she withdrew the faded photograph that had survived her journey across the ice. Water damage had obscured much of the image, but Aput could make out 3 figures standing together against what appeared to be a snowy landscape. The faces were too blurred to distinguish clearly, but the body language spoke of family, of people who belong together. "This is us," Maya said, her voice barely audible above the wind outside their shelter. "Before everything went wrong. We were happy then." She traced the outline of the tallest figure with one finger. "Papa always said we were explorers, that we went to places other people were afraid to visit, because someone needed to understand what was happening to the world." Aput studied the photograph with the careful attention he gave to reading ice, conditions or weather patterns. Despite the damage, he could see that it had been taken in a place similar to where they now sheltered, endless white stretching to the horizon, the kind of landscape that either killed visitors or taught them profound respect for nature's power. "Your family? They come to Arctic before?" "Many times. Since I was very little." Mama said the ice was like a library full of stories about what the Earth was like long ago. And Papa said it was also like a warning about what might happen in the future. The photograph represented more than just a family memory. It was evidence of a life dedicated to understanding forces larger than individual survival, people who risked everything to gather knowledge that might help others. Aput found himself respecting these strangers who had trusted him with their most precious treasure. "They teach you about ice, about reading signs?" Maya nodded eagerly. "They showed me how ice cores tell about ancient weather, how you can see in the ice what happened hundreds of years ago. And they taught me to listen to the sounds ice makes when it's happy or angry or scared." As if summoned by her words, a deep groan echoed from somewhere beneath their shelter. Aput had heard such sounds before, the voice of ice adjusting to pressure, temperature changes, or the movement of water far below. But this sound carried undertones that made him uneasy, a complexity that suggested forces he didn't fully understand. "What does that sound mean?" Maya asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "Ice is moving, but not normal movement. Something different happening underneath." They sat in contemplative silence, listening to the conversation between ice and hidden forces. Maya's presence had changed how Aput experienced these familiar sounds. Now he found himself trying to understand them the way her parents might, as data rather than simply natural phenomena to be endured. "Aput," Maya said finally, her voice carrying the gravity of someone much older than her years, "I need to find Mama and Papa, but I don't want you to be alone again. You saved my life, and now you're part of my family too." The declaration hit Aput with unexpected force. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that isolation was chosen rather than imposed, that solitude was preferable to the pain of caring about people who might be lost. But Maya's simple acceptance of him as family challenged every justification he had constructed for his exile. "Family is not just blood," he said slowly, the words forming as he spoke them. "Sometimes family is people who find each other when both are lost." Maya smiled for the first time since recovering her memories, an expression that transformed her face from that of a traumatized survivor to that of a child who had rediscovered hope. "Then we'll go find them together. You and me, like a real family." The commitment settled between them with the weight of a sacred promise. Aput understood that accepting her offer meant abandoning the protective isolation he had built around his heart, opening himself again to the possibility of loss and the certainty of caring deeply about another person's welfare. Outside, the wind began to shift direction, bringing new scents and sounds that suggested weather changes ahead. The storm that had trapped them was moving on, creating a window of opportunity for travel. But it also meant leaving the safety of their shelter for a journey across unstable ice to reunite with people he had never met, people who represented a world far more complex than his traditional understanding. "We wait for best weather," he decided aloud. "Then we go find your parents, all of us together." Maya clutched the photograph against her chest, her eyes bright with tears that spoke of gratitude rather than sorrow. The damaged image had become a talisman, a reminder that families could survive separation and trauma, that love endured even when everything else seemed lost. The helicopter appeared against the pale sky like a mechanical bird struggling against wind that wanted to claim it. Eput spotted it first, the distant thrum of rotors barely audible above the constant whisper of wind across ice. Maya scrambled from their shelter, waving her arms frantically as the aircraft circled their position, its pilot clearly fighting to maintain control in the turbulent air. "They found us!" she shouted, her voice carried away by the wind even as she spoke. But Eput watched the helicopter's erratic flight pattern with growing concern. This wasn't the controlled approach of a routine rescue. The aircraft lurched and struggled, losing altitude faster than any pilot would choose. Black smoke trailed from somewhere near the engine compartment, and the rotor's rhythm carried an irregular beat that spoke of mechanical failure rather than triumph. The crash happened almost in slow motion. The helicopter's tail rotor failed first, sending the aircraft spinning as the pilot fought desperately to control their descent. They hit the ice hard, bouncing once before sliding sideways across the frozen surface, metal shrieking against ice in a sound that would haunt dreams for years to come. Eput and Maya ran toward the wreckage, their feet slipping on ice made treacherous by scattered debris. The pilot hung unconscious in her harness, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead where the impact had thrown her against the instrument panel. In the passenger compartment, a rescue worker moaned softly. His leg bent at an angle that told its own story of broken bones and torn muscles. "Help them," Maya said urgently, her small hands already working to unbuckle the pilot's safety harness with surprising competence. Sarah Mitchell, according to the name patch on her flight suit, was perhaps 40 years old, with the weathered hands of someone who had spent years fighting against machine and nature both. Her breathing was steady but shallow, and when Eput carefully examined her pupils, they responded normally to the lamplight he used for testing. The rescue worker, Tom Bradley by his identification, was conscious but clearly in shock. His right leg showed obvious fracture below the knee, but no visible bleeding that would indicate arterial damage. He looked up at Maya with confusion mixed with relief. You're the Chen girl, Maya Chen. We've been searching for you for weeks." "I'm okay," Maya said, demonstrating the calm competence her parents had taught her for emergency situations. "But you're hurt. We need to get you both somewhere warm." Maya surprised everyone by immediately taking charge of the medical situation. She directed Eput to check the aircraft's emergency medical kit while she examined Tom's injuries with knowledge that seemed far beyond her 8 years. Her small hands moved with confidence as she checked for signs of internal bleeding, tested reflexes, and assessed the severity of visible wounds. "Mama and Papa taught me first aid," she explained when Tom looked at her in amazement. "They said when you work in dangerous places, everyone needs to know how to help when people get hurt." From the helicopter's scattered emergency supplies, they salvaged a modern medical kit that contained supplies far superior to anything in Eput's traditional healing arsenal. But Maya demonstrated how to combine both approaches, using sterile bandages and antiseptics from the kit while applying pressure point techniques and positioning. Strategies that Eput recognized from his own people's healing traditions. "Your parents," Tom said weakly, as Maya splinted his leg using materials from both the medical kit and improvised supports Eput carved from pieces of the aircraft. "They're alive. At the old weather station about 20 kilometers. From here, they've been coordinating search efforts, refusing to leave until we found you." The information hit Maya like a physical blow. Her parents weren't just alive. They had stayed in this dangerous place, organizing rescue efforts rather than seeking their own safety. The knowledge that they had never stopped looking for her brought tears that she quickly wiped away to focus on the immediate crisis. Pilot Sarah began to regain consciousness as they worked, her eyes opening to focus slowly on Maya's face. We've been looking everywhere." Her voice was weak but growing stronger as awareness returned. "I'm fine. Eput saved me. He took care of me when I was lost and sick. Maya's voice carried pride as she introduced her protector to the people who had risked their lives to find her. Sarah tried to sit up, wincing as movement revealed additional injuries. The radio. Need to contact base. Tell them we found you. But when they checked the helicopter's communication equipment, they discovered it had been destroyed in the crash. The twisted metal and shattered electronics represented their only link to the outside world, now reduced to useless debris scattered across the ice. How long before they expect you back? Aput asked, understanding that rescue operations would have schedules and protocols. 6 hours, Tom answered through gritted teeth. If we don't report in, they'll send another team. But the weather window is closing. This might have been the last flight possible for days. 4 people in a shelter, built for one, created challenges Aput had never anticipated. But Maya proved remarkably adept at organizing their cramped quarters for maximum efficiency and comfort. She arranged sleeping areas to conserve body heat, rationed their food supplies with mathematical precision, and established schedules that ensured everyone received attention for their injuries while maintaining the shelter's essential functions. Your daughter is extraordinary, Tom told Aput as Maya carefully changed the dressing on his injured leg. I've worked with trained paramedics who aren't as competent as she is. She's not my daughter, Aput began, then stopped. The distinction felt increasingly meaningless as he watched Maya move between patients with the confidence of someone raised to handle emergencies. But yes, she is extraordinary. Sarah propped herself against the shelter's wall, her concussion symptoms improving but still requiring careful monitoring. She studied Aput with the intense curiosity of someone trying to understand how a traditional hunter had become central to a modern rescue operation. Maya's parents told us about you, Sarah said. Dr. Chen said they deliberately directed Maya toward traditional hunting grounds because they trusted indigenous knowledge more than modern search and rescue protocols. Smart parents, Aput replied simply. As they settled into their forced cohabitation, stories began to emerge that revealed the scope of the search effort Maya's disappearance had triggered. Tom described weeks of aerial reconnaissance, ground teams combing impossible terrain, and international cooperation between rescue organizations from 3 different countries. Your parents never stopped believing we'd find you, Tom told Maya. Dr. Chen organized search grids based on traditional migration patterns and seasonal hunting routes. She said indigenous people had survived in this region for thousands of years, so their knowledge would guide us to you better than satellite imagery. Maya felt a complex mixture of guilt and pride, learning about the resources devoted to finding her. So many people helped just to find one little girl whose parents are doing research that could help protect thousands of people from climate changes in the Arctic, Sarah explained. Your family's work isn't just academic, it's about understanding how changes in ice patterns affect everyone who lives in polar regions. The revelation added new dimensions to Maya's understanding of her family's mission. She had known her parents were scientists, but the scope of their work's importance was becoming clear through the eyes of people who had risked their lives to reunite them. During the long hours of confinement, cultural exchanges developed naturally. Tom shared stories of previous rescue operations, describing the satisfaction of bringing lost people safely home to their families. Sarah talked about learning to fly in conditions that challenged both machine and pilot, finding freedom in mastering skills that few people ever attempted. Maya served as translator not just between languages, but between worldviews. She helped Tom understand why Aput read weather patterns through subtle changes in ice formation rather than relying on electronic instruments. She explained to Sarah how traditional hunters developed navigation skills that functioned perfectly, even when technology failed. It's like music, Maya said, trying to help them understand Aput's approach to survival. Mama always said traditional knowledge and modern science are like different instruments in the same orchestra. They make different sounds, but when you put them together, the music is more beautiful than either one alone. Aput found himself drawn into conversations about topics he had never considered. Tom's descriptions of search and rescue operations revealed a world where people dedicated their lives to helping strangers, where modern technology served ancient human impulses toward compassion and mutual aid. In my culture, Aput said during one evening discussion, survival depends on community. One person alone cannot live long in this land. But I forgot this truth for 3 years, chose isolation over connection. And now? Sarah asked gently. Now I remember that helping others is not burden. It is what makes life worth surviving. Maya smiled at his words, understanding that something fundamental had shifted in the man who had saved her life. The shelter that had begun as his refuge from human connection had become a place where bonds formed across cultural and generational boundaries. As night settled around their refuge, the 4 occupants arranged themselves for sleep with the careful choreography of people learning to share space and trust. Maya positioned herself between Aput and the injured rescuers, her small presence serving as a bridge between worlds that had seemed incompatible just days before. Outside, the wind carried voices of the Arctic night, ice shifting with temperature changes, distant animals calling across vast spaces. The eternal conversation between land and sky that had provided soundtrack to human survival in this region for millennia. Inside their shelter, 4 people from different backgrounds discovered that shared vulnerability created bonds, stronger than cultural differences. The storm that arrived 3 days later carried a fury that dwarfed their previous experiences with Arctic weather. Even Aput, who had weathered countless blizzards, found himself awed by the sheer violence of wind that seemed determined to erase all human presence from the landscape. The modern weather instruments Tom had salvaged from the helicopter registered readings that exceeded their maximum scales before the devices failed entirely. This is beyond anything in our forecasting models, Tom said, studying the broken instruments with professional concern. Wind speeds that should be impossible at this latitude, pressure drops that don't match any storm patterns in our databases. But Aput read the approaching disaster through signs his ancestors had taught him to recognize the particular quality of light that preceded truly dangerous weather, the behavior of what few animals remained in the area, the subtle changes in ice sounds that warned of catastrophic pressure systems approaching. Very bad storm coming, he announced with quiet certainty. Worse than storms I have seen in 47 years. Our shelter will not hold. The group faced a choice between attempting to reach better shelter across dangerous ice or trying to construct emergency protection using Aput's traditional knowledge combined with materials salvaged from the helicopter crash. Sarah's head injury made travel inadvisable, and Tom's broken leg eliminated any possibility of quick movement across unstable terrain. Can you build something stronger? Maya asked, her faith in Aput's abilities absolute, despite the magnitude of the approaching challenge. Maybe, but need everyone to help. Traditional ice shelter, but bigger, stronger. Use old knowledge and new materials together. What followed was the most intensive construction project of Aput's life. Working against time as the storm system approached, he directed the creation of a traditional Inuit storm shelter, but one reinforced with aluminum struts from the helicopter, insulated with modern survival blankets, and anchored with cables salvaged from the aircraft's lifting gear. Maya proved invaluable as both translator and assistant, understanding intuitively how to combine her parents' scientific approach with Aput's ancestral knowledge. She calculated load distributions while he shaped ice blocks, helping optimize the shelter's engineering, while respecting traditional design principles that had kept Arctic peoples alive for thousands of years. The old shelter design works because it uses the storm's own force to make itself stronger, Maya explained to Tom and Sarah as they worked. Like how Papa's ice core drilling equipment uses pressure to cut through ice instead of fighting against it. The emergency shelter took shape as a fusion of ancient wisdom and modern materials. Aput's traditional ice-cutting techniques created interlocking blocks that formed walls strong enough to withstand hurricane-force winds. But those walls were reinforced with aluminum framework that distributed stress in ways traditional builders had never imagined possible. Tom, despite his injury, contributed engineering insights that helped optimize the shelter's aerodynamics. If we angle the entrance this way, it creates a pressure differential that actually helps seal the structure when wind hits it. Sarah, fighting through concussion symptoms, organized their supply inventory with the methodical precision of someone who understood that survival margins in extreme conditions were measured in calories, degrees of warmth, and hours of shelter integrity. When the storm finally struck, it brought winds that transformed the Arctic landscape into something alien and hostile. The group huddled inside their hybrid shelter as the world outside became a white chaos of noise and violence that seemed to have no connection to any natural phenomenon they had previously experienced. "It's like the planet is screaming," Maya whispered as ice debris hammered against their walls with the force of artillery. Food and fuel supplies, carefully rationed before the storm, dwindled to critical levels as days passed without any break in the weather's assault. The traditional seal oil that had sustained Aput through previous winters ran low, forcing difficult decisions about heat versus cooking versus the psychological comfort of light in absolute darkness. "How long can storms like this last?" Sarah asked, her pilot's training making her acutely aware of fuel consumption and resource management. "Normal storms, maybe 2 days," Aput replied. "But this is not normal storm. This is something new, something angry." Maya shared what she remembered of her parents' research about changing weather patterns in the Arctic. Mama said the ice was telling stories about how the whole world's weather was getting more extreme, more unpredictable. She said traditional knowledge would become more important, not less, because old wisdom knows how to survive when everything else fails. As their situation grew more desperate, the 4 survivors discovered reserves of strength and resourcefulness they hadn't known they possessed. Tom fashioned tools from helicopter debris that helped maintain their shelter. Sarah taught them military survival techniques from her aviation training. Maya contributed problem-solving skills that bridged traditional and modern approaches to staying alive. On the storm's 5th day, the ice beneath their shelter began to speak in voices none of them had heard before. Deep groaning sounds rose from far below, punctuated by sharp cracks that reverberated through the frozen ground like gunshots. Aput had lived his entire life reading the language of ice, but these sounds carried meanings that stretched beyond his experience into territory that felt dangerous and unknown. "Ice is moving wrong," he said, pressing his ear to the shelter floor to better interpret the vibrations. "Not normal settling, something breaking apart underneath us." Through the storm's fury, they could hear larger sounds, the grinding roar of massive ice sheets shifting against each other, the thunderous boom of pressure ridges forming and collapsing, the sharp report of cracks opening across areas that should have remained solid for months. Maya remembered fragments of her parents' research about ice stability and climate change. Mama said, "Warming water underneath can make ice break apart, even when the surface looks solid." She said it was like standing on a floor that was rotting from underneath. Tom checked his salvaged GPS unit, one of the few electronic devices still functioning after the helicopter crash. The readings showed their position, but more disturbingly, they revealed that their coordinates were changing slowly but steadily. The ice shelf they had thought was solid ground was actually drifting, carrying them away from known landmarks and established rescue zones. "We're moving southeast at about 2 kilometers per hour, Tom reported, his voice carefully controlled despite the implications. "If this continues, we'll be in open water within 12 hours. The revelation transformed their survival situation from difficult to potentially catastrophic. Aput's traditional knowledge included techniques for surviving on unstable ice, but those methods assumed small-scale problems and access to solid ground within reasonable distance. Being carried into open ocean on a deteriorating ice shelf exceeded even ancestral wisdom. Sarah, despite her head injury, began calculating their options with the methodical precision of someone trained to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. The storm has to break eventually. When it does, we need to be ready to move fast to more stable ice. But as the hours passed, the sounds from beneath grew more ominous. The ice shelf was not just drifting, it was beginning to fracture. Through the shelter floor, they could feel vibrations that spoke of massive structural failure occurring in slow motion, like a building collapsing over the course of hours rather than seconds. "We need to be ready to evacuate," Aput said, beginning to gather their most essential supplies. When ice breaks like this happens very fast at the end. From his pack, Aput retrieved his father's seal-hunting harpoon, a weapon that had been crafted with the precise balance and lethal efficiency required for hunting from unstable ice platforms. The wooden shaft, worn smooth by decades of use, bore carved symbols that told the story of successful hunts and family survival through harsh winters. "This saved my family many times," he said, checking the bone point that could penetrate seal hide with deadly accuracy. "Maybe will save us too." Maya examined the harpoon with the respectful attention she gave to all artifacts of traditional knowledge. The weapon represented not just hunting tool, but survival philosophy, the understanding that in harsh environments, success required perfect balance between patience and instant action, between respect for prey and determination to provide for family. The critical moment arrived without warning. A sound like thunder erupted from beneath their shelter, followed by the sensation of the world tilting as their ice platform suddenly cracked along a line that ran directly under their emergency refuge. "Everyone out! Now!" Aput shouted, grabbing Maya with one arm while clutching the harpoon with the other. They emerged from the collapsing shelter into a landscape transformed by catastrophe. The storm still raged, but now they could see through the blowing snow that their ice shelf had split into dozens of smaller floes, each one drifting independently toward open water that gleamed black between the white fragments. Sarah and Tom struggled across the tilting ice, Tom's broken leg making movement agonizing but necessary. Maya helped support him, while Aput used the harpoon as a testing pole, probing ahead for solid footing as they picked their way toward what appeared to be a larger, more stable ice platform. The gap between floes widened with each passing minute. What had been a crack when they started moving became a channel of dark water 2 meters wide by the time they reached its edge. Tom's injury made jumping impossible, and the water temperature would kill anyone who fell in within minutes. "Can't make it across," Tom said. His voice resigned but calm. Aput studied the gap, calculating angles and distances with eyes trained by years of hunting seals from ice edges where miscalculation meant death. The harpoon in his hands represented more than a weapon. It was a tool for connecting across impossible distances, for bridging gaps that seemed insurmountable. Maya fell through the ice so suddenly that the others barely had time to register what had happened. One moment, she was helping Tom navigate across what appeared to be solid ground. The next, she had vanished through a snow-covered weak spot into the dark water beneath. The frigid ocean swallowed her small form with barely a splash, leaving only a jagged hole, and the terrifying knowledge that Arctic water would kill her within minutes. Aput reacted with instincts honed by 47 years of hunting on dangerous ice. He threw himself flat against the surface, distributing his weight to avoid breaking through himself, and army crawled toward the hole where Maya had disappeared. The harpoon became his lifeline, its carved shaft extending his reach toward the gap where she might resurface. "Maya!" He shouted into the opening, his voice carrying across water that looked black as night, despite the storm's white fury raging above. For seconds, that felt like hours. Nothing happened. Then Maya's head broke the surface, her face already pale with cold shock, her movements growing sluggish as hypothermia began its deadly work. She gasped for air but couldn't speak, her body's system shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature for as long as possible. "Grab the harpoon," Aput called, extending the weapon toward her. "Hold tight." But Maya's coordination was already failing. Her attempts to grasp the harpoon shaft resulted in weak, uncontrolled movements that couldn't maintain grip on the smooth wood. The water was stealing her strength faster than Aput could organize a rescue, and he watched in horror as she began to sink beneath the surface again. Sarah, despite her concussion, organized Tom into a human anchor system. "Grab Aput's legs. Don't let him go through the ice too." Tom wrapped his arms around Aput's ankles, his broken legs screaming with pain, but his grip remaining solid as Aput stretched further over the hole. The harpoon's bone point came within inches of Maya's reaching fingers, but the gap remained just too wide for connection. "Can't reach," Aput said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching a child die despite his best efforts. Then Maya surprised everyone. Fighting through the cold that was shutting down her body, she dove beneath the surface and swam toward the ice shelf's edge with movements that showed remarkable strength and technique for someone her age. When she surfaced again, she was close enough for Aput to grab her wrist with his free hand. "Got her!" he shouted, beginning the delicate process of pulling her from water that wanted to claim both of them. The rescue required all 4 survivors working together with perfect coordination. Aput provided the direct connection to Maya, his grip on her wrist, the only thing preventing her from sinking back into the deadly water. Tom anchored him despite his own injury, using core strength and determination to keep both rescuer and victim from sliding through the ice. Sarah directed the operation, her pilot's training helping her coordinate multiple people performing precise actions under extreme pressure. "Pull steady, don't jerk," Sarah called out. "If the ice cracks more, we lose everyone." Inch by careful inch, they drew Maya from the water onto the ice surface. Her lips had turned blue, her small body shook uncontrollably, and her eyes showed the glassy look that indicated dangerous drops in core body temperature. But she was alive, and her swimming had demonstrated reserves of strength and skill that amazed everyone who witnessed her escape. "Where did you learn to swim like that?" Tom asked, as they wrapped her in every piece of warm clothing they could spare. "Papa taught me," Maya said through chattering teeth. "Said scientists who work around water need to know how to save themselves if they fall in." From her pocket, she withdrew her mother's waterproof research journal, somehow still intact despite her submersion in Arctic water. The notebook represented years of careful observations about ice conditions, climate patterns, and environmental changes that could help predict future disasters like the one they were currently experiencing. "Mama's research," she said, pressing the journal against her chest. "Has to stay safe. Important for helping other people." Aput marveled at Maya's priorities, even while fighting for her life in water that should have killed her. She had protected scientific data that might benefit strangers she would never meet. The journal contained knowledge that could save lives beyond their immediate group, research that connected their survival story to larger questions about environmental change and human adaptation. "Your parents raised a remarkable daughter," Sarah said, helping to restore circulation to Maya's hands and feet. "Most adults wouldn't have had the presence of mind to protect research data while drowning." As they worked to warm Maya and treat her hypothermia, the storm finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind's fury decreased from devastating to merely dangerous, and visibility improved enough for them to assess their situation on the drifting ice floe that had become their temporary refuge. As the storm's fury finally began to subside, the group found themselves stranded on an ice floe, roughly the size of a basketball court, drifting steadily toward open ocean. Their supplies had been scattered when the ice shelf broke apart, leaving them with only what they could carry during the desperate evacuation. The situation demanded immediate action if they hoped to signal for rescue before floating beyond the range of search operations. Maya's near drowning had left her weak but determined. Despite Aput's concerns about her condition, she insisted on helping create rescue signals using every reflective surface they could salvage from the helicopter wreckage. Her small hands worked efficiently, organizing pieces of metal and glass into arrangements that would catch sunlight. When the clouds finally cleared, Mama taught me about signal theory, she explained as she positioned a piece of twisted aluminum to maximize its reflective potential. She said survival sometimes depends on understanding how light behaves, how it travels, how it can carry messages across distances too far for voices. The makeshift signal mirror they constructed used fragments from the helicopter's windscreen held in a frame of bent aluminum struts. Aput contributed traditional knowledge about reading wind patterns and predicting weather breaks, helping them identify the most likely direction from which rescue aircraft might approach. In my grandfather's time, hunters used polished bone to signal across long distances, Aput said, adjusting the mirror's angle according to the sun's position. Same principle, but these modern materials reflect much brighter light. Tom, despite his injury, contributed crucial information about search and rescue protocols. They'll be flying grid patterns starting from our last known position. When the weather clears enough for safe flight operations, we'll have maybe a 6-hour window before they expand the search area beyond visual range. As if summoned by their preparations, the clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of blue sky that seemed impossibly brilliant after days of grey storm cover. The first aircraft appeared as a distant speck against the clearing sky, close enough to see but too far away to hear their voices or spot them without assistance. Maya took control of the signal mirror with steady hands, angling it to catch sunlight and reflect it toward the approaching aircraft in the pattern Tom had taught her. 3 long flashes, 3 short, 3 long again. The international distress signal repeated every few seconds as the aircraft flew its search pattern across their sector. There! Sarah pointed toward the aircraft, which had begun to change course in their direction. They see us. But their relief turned to concern as they watched the rescue helicopter struggle against wind conditions that, while improved, remained challenging for aircraft operations. The pilot made 3 attempts to approach their ice floe, each time forced to pull away as downdrafts and turbulence made landing dangerous. Through gestures visible from the air, the rescue crew indicated they would drop supplies and return with better equipment when conditions improved further. A package descended on a parachute, landing close enough to their floe that Aput could retrieve it without risking another ice breakthrough. Inside the supply drop, they found emergency rations, additional warm clothing, a working radio, and most importantly, a message from Maya's parents. Dr. Elena Chen's voice emerged from the radio with words that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Maya, sweetheart, if you're hearing this, we're at the weather station waiting for you. The rescue team says you're safe with people who care about you. We're so proud of how brave you've been, and we can't wait to hold you again. Dr. Marcus Chen's voice followed. To the people who saved our daughter, we can never repay what you've done. Maya's rescue has brought together traditional knowledge and modern science in ways that will help save other lives. You've given us back our most precious treasure. Maya held the radio close to her chest, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than fear for the first time since Aput had found her wandering across the ice. They're really okay. They're really waiting for me. The rescue helicopter returned 2 hours later with specialized equipment for evacuating people from unstable ice platforms. But as the aircraft hovered overhead, preparing to lower rescue gear, Maya made an announcement that surprised everyone. I'm not leaving without Aput, she declared, her voice carrying the determined tone that had become familiar to everyone who knew her. He saved my life, and now he's part of my family. We all go together or nobody goes. Tom and Sarah exchanged glances of understanding. Their shared ordeal had created bonds that transcended the original rescue mission. They had become a unit, a chosen family forged by survival and mutual dependence. "She's right," Sarah said, speaking into the radio to communicate with the hovering helicopter. "We're all together in this. Nobody gets left behind." The signal mirror continued to flash in the sunlight, no longer calling for rescue, but serving as a beacon of hope. That sometimes the most important discoveries happen not in laboratories or research stations, but in moments when strangers become family through shared courage and compassion. The rescue helicopter that arrived carried more than just evacuation equipment. It brought Maya's parents. Through the aircraft's windows, she could see Dr. Elena Chen and Dr. Marcus Chen, both wearing the heavy Arctic gear of experienced researchers, but with faces that showed weeks of worry and sleepless nights. When Maya saw them, she began crying with a mixture of relief, joy, and the complex emotions of someone who had grown up significantly during their separation. "Mama! Papa!" she called out, as the helicopter touched down on the most stable section of their ice floe, its rotors creating a whirlwind of snow that temporarily obscured everything. Dr. Eleanor Chen was the first to reach her daughter, dropping to her knees on the ice to wrap Maya in an embrace that spoke of fears finally released and prayers finally answered. Dr. Marcus Chen joined them, his weathered face showing the strain of weeks spent coordinating search efforts while fighting his own injuries from the original crash. "We never stopped looking," Elena whispered into Maya's hair. "Every day, every night, we knew you were out there somewhere. And we knew you were strong enough to survive." "Apat saved me," Maya said, pulling back to look toward the man who had become her protector and chosen family. "When I was lost and cold and couldn't remember anything, he took care of me. He's my friend now, my real friend." Dr. Marcus Chen approached Aput with the respect of one survivor meeting another. The two men studied each other for a moment, the traditional hunter whose knowledge had preserved a lost child, and the scientist whose research had brought them all together in this remote place. "There are no words," Marcus said simply. "You saved our daughter's life. You gave us back everything that matters." Aput felt uncomfortable with praise, as he always had when people acknowledged his actions. "She saved me too. Gave me reason to remember why life is worth living." Elena examined the group with the trained eye of someone accustomed to assessing situations in remote locations. She noted Tom's professionally splinted leg, Sarah's careful movements that indicated ongoing concussion symptoms, and most importantly, the way Maya positioned herself between Aput and the newcomers, not with fear, but with the protective instinct of someone defending family. "Maya wrote to us about you," Elena told Aput, producing a worn hospital bracelet from her pocket. "She insisted we bring this. Said it was important. The bracelet belonged to Marcus, left behind when they evacuated him for medical treatment after the crash. Maya had found it in her coat pocket, apparently placed there by her father during their desperate final moments together at the crash site. She had carried it through her entire ordeal, a tangible connection to the family she couldn't remember. "You kept this safe for me," Marcus said, accepting the bracelet from Maya's small hands. "Just like Aput kept you safe." As the reunion continued, the rescue team worked efficiently to prepare everyone for evacuation. Tom's leg required immediate medical attention. Sarah needed comprehensive evaluation for her head injury. And Maya, despite her remarkable resilience, showed signs of exhaustion that concerned the medical personnel. But Maya refused to board the helicopter until she received assurances that Aput would not be left behind. "He doesn't have anywhere to go," she explained to her parents. "His family died and he's been alone for 3 years. But he's not alone anymore because now he has us." Eleanor and Marcus exchanged glances that carried the entire conversation of parents who understood their daughter had experienced something that had changed her fundamentally. The little girl who had boarded their research flight weeks ago had become someone deeper, more serious, more aware of life's fragility and preciousness. Of course he comes with us, Elena said, though Aput began to protest that he didn't belong in their world of universities and research stations. Maya is right, Marcus added. You're part of our family now. We take care of family. The evacuation to Iqaluit took 2 hours, flying over landscape that looked both beautiful and hostile from the air. Maya sat between her parents, but kept one hand extended toward Aput, maintaining physical connection with the person who had been her anchor during the worst experience of her young life. As they flew over the crash site where their ordeal had begun, Maya pressed her face to the window, studying the scattered debris that marked where her old life had ended and her new understanding had begun. It looks so small from up here, she said wonderfully. But when I was walking across the ice, it felt like the whole world was ice and cold and being alone. You were never alone, Elena said softly. Even when we couldn't find you, you were connected to people who cared about you. Love doesn't disappear just because people are separated. The hospital bracelet gleamed silver in the aircraft's interior lighting, a simple piece of identification that had become a symbol of connections that endured despite separation, trauma, and the vast indifference of Arctic wilderness. 6 months later, Maya stood on the deck of the research vessel Aurora, watching icebergs drift past like ancient sculptures in the Arctic waters. The ship carried a team of scientists, traditional knowledge holders, and educators working together to understand climate changes in ways that honored both modern research and ancestral wisdom. She had grown taller during their time in civilization, but more importantly, she had grown into someone who could bridge different worlds with confidence and grace. Aput emerged from the ship's lower deck, carrying the navigation compass that had become his constant companion since joining the research team. The instrument combined traditional magnetic navigation with modern GPS technology, representing the fusion of old and new knowledge that had become central to their work together. Ice patterns different this year, he observed, studying the horizon with eyes trained by nearly 5 decades of Arctic experience. Moving faster, breaking apart in places that should stay solid, Maya nodded, recording his observations in a notebook that contained both scientific measurements and traditional knowledge shared by elders from communities across the Arctic. The research project had evolved far beyond her parents' original climate. Studies to become something more comprehensive, a collaboration between indigenous communities and scientific institutions that respected both ways of understanding the world. The elders from Iqaluit said the same thing when we visited last month, Maya replied, checking readings on instruments that measured water temperature, ice density, and current patterns. All the traditional indicators are showing changes that their grandfathers never saw. Dr. Elena Chen approached them with a tablet, displaying data from the ship's advanced sensors. Over the months since their reunion, she had learned to value Aput's interpretations of environmental changes as much as any scientific instrument, understanding that some kinds of knowledge require decades of intimate relationship with the land to develop. Aput's observations about ice formation patterns are matching our satellite data almost perfectly, Elena said, showing them images of ice coverage from previous years compared to current conditions. Traditional knowledge is proving more accurate for predicting local changes than our computer models. The collaboration had transformed all their lives in unexpected ways. Maya's parents had adapted their research methods to include traditional knowledge holders as equal partners rather than just consultants. Aput had discovered that sharing his understanding of Arctic systems could help protect the homeland he loved while giving him purpose beyond mere survival. Dr. Marcus Chen joined their discussion, carrying samples of ice cores that would be analyzed for chemical composition and historical climate data. His relationship with Aput had evolved from gratitude to genuine friendship, built on mutual respect for different but complementary ways of understanding the natural world. The core samples from this region tell a story that goes back thousands of years, Marcus said, gesturing toward the ice-covered landscape around them. But Aput's knowledge tells us what those ancient patterns mean for people living here. Today, Maya served as more than just translator between these different approaches to knowledge. She had become a bridge who helped each side understand the value of the other's perspective. Her experience surviving in the Arctic had given her credibility with traditional knowledge holders, while her scientific education helped her communicate indigenous insights to researchers. It's like music, she explained to a group of visiting scientists during one of their regular video conferences with universities around the world. Traditional knowledge and modern science are like different instruments in an orchestra. They make different sounds, but when you play them together, the music is more beautiful than either one alone. The compass in Aput's hands represented more than just navigation. It symbolized the fusion of traditional and modern approaches that had become central to their work. The magnetic needle pointed toward true north, according to principles that had guided travelers for centuries, while the GPS display provided precise coordinates using satellite technology that would have seemed like magic to his ancestors. This tool helps us know where we are, Aput said, teaching Maya to read both the traditional compass face and the digital display. But knowing where you are is only important if you also know where you're going. As their research vessel continued through Arctic waters, documenting changes that would affect communities around the world, Maya understood that their survival story had become something larger than personal triumph. Their experience demonstrated that some of humanity's greatest challenges required combining the deepest wisdom of the past with the most advanced tools of the present. The compass needle swayed gently with the ship's movement, but its direction remained constant, pointing toward a future where traditional knowledge and modern science work together to help humanity navigate an uncertain world with wisdom gathered from both ancient experience and contemporary understanding. 1 year after their rescue, Maya and Aput returned to the place where their story had begun. The research expedition included Maya's parents, several Arctic communities' elders, and a film crew documenting how traditional knowledge could help address modern environmental challenges. But for Maya and Aput, the journey held deeper significance, an opportunity to complete a circle of healing and understanding that had started with a lost child and a lonely hunter finding each other in the vast Arctic night. The landscape looked different in late summer. Where once everything had been white snow and dark ice, now patches of tundra showed through the snow cover, and areas that should have remained frozen year-round revealed open water that reflected the midnight sun. The changes were visible proof of the environmental shifts that had brought Maya's family to this remote region in the first place. "This is where I found you," Aput said, pointing to a depression in the ice that corresponded to his memory of that first meeting. "Right here, you were walking toward me like a small ghost in the darkness." Maya studied the spot with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile memory with reality. The place where she had nearly died from cold and exhaustion now seemed unremarkable, just another patch of Arctic landscape that revealed its dangers only to those who understood how quickly conditions could become deadly. "I remember being so scared," she said softly. "Everything was white and cold, and I couldn't remember who I was or where I was supposed to go. But when you came out of the darkness and said you needed someone to talk to, I wasn't scared anymore." From her backpack, Maya withdrew a carved bone teaching tool that Aput had made for her during their months working together. The bone bore traditional symbols that represented navigation techniques, weather prediction methods, and survival strategies that had kept Arctic peoples alive for thousands of years. But it also included markings that represented modern scientific concepts, creating a fusion of knowledge systems that reflected their unique partnership. "You said I could learn to read the ice like a book," Maya said, running her fingers over the carved symbols. Now I can read both kinds of books, the old stories in the ice and the new stories in the research data. Aput watched with pride as Maya demonstrated skills she had learned over the past year. She could identify ice conditions that were safe for travel versus dangerous areas that might give way under pressure. She understood how wind patterns affected temperature and precipitation, how animal behavior indicated weather changes, how the position of stars provided navigation reference points that remained constant even when everything else seemed to change. "Your parents gave you education from schools," Aput said, "but the land gave you education that no school can teach. Both kinds of learning make you stronger." Dr. Elena Chen approached them carrying a GPS unit that showed their precise coordinates, but also a collection of ice core samples that would provide historical climate data stretching back centuries. Her research had evolved to include traditional knowledge as equal partners with scientific instruments, recognizing that some kinds of understanding required cultural continuity rather than technological advancement. The ice cores from this region show that current changes are happening faster than anything in the geological record, Eleanor said, displaying graphs on her tablet that illustrated temperature fluctuations over time. But the traditional knowledge holders predicted these changes years before our instruments detected them. Dr. Marcus Chen joined their discussion, noting how traditional prediction methods had proven more accurate than computer models for anticipating local environmental changes. Aput's understanding of ice behavior saved our daughter's life, but it's also helping us understand climate patterns that could affect millions of people. As they prepared to place a memorial marker at the site where Maya and Aput had first met, the film crew interviewed community elders about the importance of preserving traditional knowledge in an era of rapid environmental change. But Maya found herself more interested in the quiet conversations between Aput and the elders, exchanges that happened in languages she was learning but didn't yet fully understand. "What are they talking about?" she asked during one of these conversations. "About responsibility," Aput replied. "About how knowledge is gift that must be shared, not kept hidden. About how helping one person can sometimes help many people, even when you don't know how at the time." The carved bone teaching tool represented more than just educational material. It symbolized the passing of knowledge between generations, the responsibility of those who possessed wisdom to share it with those who needed guidance. Maya understood that her unique position as someone who had learned both traditional and modern approaches to understanding the world came with obligations to help others bridge those same gaps. As they stood together at the place where a lost child and a lonely man had found each other, Maya realized that their story had become part of something larger, evidence that survival in an uncertain world required honoring both ancient wisdom and contemporary innovation. 5 years had passed since that first night, when Aput found Maya wandering across the ice, and now they stood together in a modern classroom in Iqaluit, teaching a new generation of students how traditional knowledge and contemporary science could work together to understand and protect the Arctic environment. Maya, now 13 and tall for her age, moved between a whiteboard displaying satellite images and a collection of traditional tools that Aput used to demonstrate ancient survival techniques. Climate change isn't just about numbers and graphs, Maya explained to the mixed group of Inuit youth and visiting students from southern universities. It's about understanding that the land is alive, that it has a voice, and that people have been listening to that voice for thousands of years. Aput stepped forward, holding in his weathered hands a new seal oil lamp that he and Maya had crafted together the previous winter. The lamp represented the culmination of their partnership, traditional design enhanced with modern materials, ancient function serving contemporary educational purposes. The flame burned steady and bright, powered by sustainable fuel sources, but incorporating LED elements that made it safe for classroom use. "This lamp is like the knowledge we share," Aput said. his English now confident after years of working with international research teams. Old wisdom provides the foundation, but new materials make it stronger, safer, more useful for helping people. Today, the students gathered around as Maya demonstrated how the lamp's construction reflected principles that applied to both traditional survival and modern environmental challenges. The fuel system represented renewable energy concepts. The heat distribution showed efficient resource management, and the light quality illustrated how traditional technologies could be adapted for contemporary needs without losing their essential character. When I was lost on the ice, this kind of lamp saved my life, Maya continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had experienced what she was teaching. But it also taught me that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about staying connected to the things that make life meaningful. Dr. Elena Chen watched from the back of the classroom, noting how naturally Maya moved between scientific explanation and cultural education. The research program they had developed since their Arctic experience had grown into an international model for integrating traditional knowledge with climate science. But Maya's teaching represented something even more valuable: the emergence of a generation that could navigate between worlds without losing connection to either. Tom Bradley, now fully recovered from his injuries and working as a coordinator for Arctic rescue operations, joined the class via video conference from his base in northern Canada. His leg had healed with only minor limitations, and his experience during their survival ordeal had led him to specialize in traditional knowledge applications for modern search and rescue protocols. The techniques Aput taught us during our time on the ice have been incorporated into training programs across the Arctic, Tom told the students. Traditional knowledge isn't just historically interesting, it's often more effective than modern methods for dealing with emergency situations in harsh environments. Sarah Mitchell participated from her new position as a pilot specializing in medical evacuations from remote communities. Her concussion had healed completely, but the experience had changed her perspective on the relationship between technology and traditional wisdom in life or death situations. Modern equipment is wonderful when it works, Sarah said through the video link. But when everything fails, traditional knowledge is what keeps you alive. Learning from people like Aput isn't just education, it's insurance for survival. As the class session concluded, Maya and Aput worked together to demonstrate the lamp-making process for students who wanted to create their own versions. The activity had become a signature element of their educational program, hands-on learning that connected abstract concepts about sustainability and traditional knowledge to practical skills that students could use and share. Every time someone lights one of these lamps, they're connecting with thousands of years of human knowledge about survival, community, and taking care of each other, Maya said, as students worked with materials and tools that bridged ancient and modern approaches to craftsmanship. Aput watched the young people with satisfaction, understanding that their survival story had become something larger than personal triumph. Through teaching, their experience had multiplied. Each student who learned to combine traditional and modern knowledge became capable of helping others navigate an uncertain world with wisdom drawn from both past and present stories. Don't end, he said as the last student completed their lamp. They become seeds that grow into new stories, new understanding, new ways of helping people find their way home. The new seal oil lamp flickered gently in the classroom's fluorescent lighting, its traditional flame enhanced by modern safety features, but retaining the essential character that had provided light, warmth, and hope to Arctic peoples for countless generations. Like the knowledge it represented, the lamp connected past and future through the simple act of bringing light to darkness, warmth to cold, and understanding to uncertainty.